the panel introduce themselves, and I feel like we should let you go first, Jen, just because of the extra effort that you put into the
extra effort. No, look at this effort.
I know.
We have sequence. So, well, should we do you first, or should we start with you, Meredith?
I'm Meredith Jepson, founder and CEO of Open Water. I'm the odd one here. I do consumer electronics, very high volume, heritage of physics consumer electronics, and I'm using that in healthcare in ways that we'll describe in the panel. But I've shipped billions of dollars of heritage of physics consumer electronics, and was also professor at MIT. I've founded 4 companies. I was an executive at Intel, Google, and Facebook.
I'm Jen Horangeff. I am wearing my patient uniform as I was thinking about some of the conversations that were happening on Twitter about like what is the right thing to wear and what's the uniform. And I was thinking about, you know, the tech startup uniform being kind of like the hoodie and the investors being like the Patagonia vest or whatever. So like, how do we identify patients? And unfortunately, this is what we usually think of in all like stock photos and graphics, so I'm just owning it to call it out against all the suits that are here this week.
And could you do a favor? Could you stand up and turn around?
Great. Thank you to my family who also works in healthcare for my mother sending me a hospital gown, and I said, "Can you overnight me a gown?" She's like, "Okay." She knows that I'm bizarre. And so I run a patient organization. We are called Savvy Cooperative. I'm the founder and CEO, and we're a little bit different. We are a co-op, collectively owned by patients, and what we do is we help connect companies or innovators directly with patients so they can actually talk to the people they're trying to build things for, so they can de-risk those innovations by understanding what are the needs of that actual community. And we really care about more diversity and inclusion in that conversation. So it's not just asking the same people that happen to have a seat at the table, which I was fortunate enough to have for so long. And so I just want to make sure other people are able to be part of that innovative process.
Thank you. Tanisha.
Great. Mike, thank you for the invitation to be here. Novel venue. So I'm Tanisha Carino. I'm currently the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Alexion. Prior to that, I think the first time Mike asked me to be part of this panel was last year, where I was the Executive Director of a nonprofit called Faster Cures. And over the course of my professional life, I've started my career as a social worker for HIV patients. I've led teams in government looking at new technologies and paying for new technologies, and then was in the biopharma consulting industry working across life sciences for many, many, many years. So I'm delighted to be here tonight. Thank you.
I think you forgot your juniorness.
Yes. So Lisa did a podcast with me this fall, where because she's such a talented podcast interviewer, she was able to suss out that to pay for college, I did do beauty pageants, was very excited to be first runner-up, Junior Miss, Lee County, Alabama.
I feel like you should also go do a little tour.
Well, I was told specifically to wear a concert t-shirt, which I did, and to dress rock and roll, even though I'm corporate. So I feel like
This is Alexion's new place.
Exactly. I'm Lisa Sudin. In my grown-up life, I am the head of the digital technology practice for Manat, Phelps & Phillips, which is a company that has a consulting firm, and a law firm, and a venture fund. And so I run the venture fund and I run that practice. And I also have a podcast called Tectonics, which some people know me through, and a blog called Venture Valkyrie. And I have not ever done anything ingenious.
Nor I. Just in case you're wondering. Yeah. Fantastic. So, first thing I want to do is we look at a new decade of, essentially, we get the chance to draw the line from the 2010s and look forward to 2020s. First of all, what should we look forward to in innovation? But how do we define innovation going forward from here? I don't know who wants to pick the question up first. What's innovation about, and how do we define it? How do we know that we have it?
Well, I would say it's just doing something different and new, and it may be evolutionary from something that came before, or maybe revolutionary, something that never existed before, nobody thought of before. But I think, we talk about innovation all the time in our field, especially on the venture side where I come from, and yet most of it never makes it into real practice or use. So for me, innovation has become something interesting and new that actually goes somewhere.
And I would layer on that, it will go somewhere if it's meaningful. And so that's sort of the lens that I always look at it is it actually, if we're talking about healthcare, making a meaningful impact on a patient's life? Are we improving outcomes? Is it helping drive that? Otherwise, it's innovation for innovation's sake, and then it is sort of doing
Innovation theater.
Yes.
I always love what you always say, Mike, the difference between experimentation and innovation. And for me, it's this idea of radically understanding what the needs are. And I know Jen will talk about that a lot, but it's the epiphany that there's a need. And I think for me, on a personal level, when you have a new baby and you're not sleeping and you see all of these different ways that new motherhood just really sucks, and that there isn't a market that's actually addressing some of the things that moms and babies need. And now you see this radical sort of explosion of industries that are really addressing those needs. And it's all, for me, about how do you begin to address and listen to the needs that exist and what doesn't actually already get met.
Yeah. Really?
I think we covered it.
Well, I think we have, but actually I think from your perspective, I think that idea that deeply listening and radically understanding what patients who are on market want, but also being aware of what's possible. And I think certainly you're at that.
Well, that's my perspective. Yeah, I mean, we live in, because we always did it that way, it's not a good reason. And so what science is and research is by successive approximation, continuing going into the unknown, putting stuff together, seeing what works, building up a team with capability to explore a different area that can have huge impact in the areas that you talk about. The thing that I'm doing is massively lowering the cost of medical imaging that can also do surgery without a knife, open the blood-brain barrier, neuromodulation, brain-computer interface, fix broken bones, cure diabetes, but also scan our bodies at massively lower cost than it's been possible before with the resolution of MRI. So that's innovative, but it's like patient, like I remember I founded a thing called One Laptop Per Child, and we go talk to different country head of states, and they're like, well, the kids in Paraguay be able to use these laptops just like the kids in Thailand versus the kids in, like, yes, it's a laptop. Like, on some, yes, I agree, but on this other level, when you're leveraging the $1 trillion manufacturing supply chain, one of the problems with medical imaging is it's just too expensive, it's too big, there's not enough of it. And so it's an easier set of problems to solve from that perspective.
Yeah, it's that kind of intersection between the possibilities and the unmet need is, someone needs to bridge that, right? And I don't think that it's necessarily that they fit together, obviously. So, how we request what you might be able to build isn't straightforward.
Well, stars are supposed to swing for the fences. It better be big, huge impact, right? So there's things like that that can change everything. Whenever autonomous vehicles, if you can do it, it has huge impact, right? Like there's things like that that are innovative. That's the space I try to work where there's pretty much disagreement. All technology can be good and evil and all that, but we can talk about that.
So another general question, do we think that it's going to look different this decade? Do we think that we're going to have the same players? Do we think we're going to have, do we think pharma is going to remain in charge?
In charge of what?
Well, elaborate.
I mean, pharma does pharma things, but they haven't really done to medical devices.
Will they stay in charge of
too
pharma?
much healthcare services. I mean, I guess it all depends on labels, right, and definitions. And I think one of the things we saw in the last 10 years was the emergence of all kinds of new companies that weren't from traditional heritage, if you will, coming into healthcare. And some of them are doing a really great job of listening and learning to all different people, and some of them are doing a really terrible job of exiting. And I think every decade or so that happens. I don't know if it's perfectly matched in 10-year cycles, but one of the things I think we've failed to do in healthcare is recognize how long it takes for things to happen, whether they're innovations in healthcare or anything else, right? And so like our MRIs, I think about MRIs, my dad, weirdly enough, launched the first MRI machine in the world, and back in the 70s. And I remember at the time, nobody wanted that. Nobody thought it was necessary or important in any way. And they could not give that shit away. It was unbelievable. I think back about it now as a kid, And now, like, we're figuring out how to do it, at home. And so I think, time, you have to look back, to think about how innovation impacts things. You can't just assuming you created it and it's going to be there tomorrow.
Talking stuff you can't give away. Tanisha.
I mean,
How's the lecture
what's
going?
interesting to me is in the biopharma sector, we've actually been very successful at looking at unmet needs as defined scientifically and clinically. And I think increasingly the system has been closed. Well, previously the system's been pretty closed, right? So we had PBMs, we had our own distributors, we had a relatively closed system as it relates to the technologies that were discovered all the way to access. And now people are asking things like, why do we have to go through a traditional distributor? What is the role of dropship through Amazon maybe one day? And there's a much more sophisticated understanding, and hopefully increasingly so, that healthcare, and in particular the biopharma industry, does not live in an isolated bubble. And whether it's through affordability, new players coming into the system, I think that for us to continue to innovate, it will really take understanding all the various actors between us and patients very differently, because those actors are changing, their business models are changing.
Right. Yeah. And Jen, from the kind of patient perspective, if you can represent a patient perspective, this complexity that we believe gets in the way of, our drugs getting to patients. Is that seen at the patient side as a barrier, or is it just a kind of bunch of complex stuff?
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, Mike. One of the things you touch on is that there are all these different things, and I think it touches on, even we were talking about this before, about my least favorite term being around compliance, with patients being non-compliant. When the entire system is set up in a way that it's just barrier after barrier after barrier. So that's what I would like to see innovations help to solve those problems. So it's seamless for the patient, so that they can actually take care of themselves the way their care plan is set up. But unfortunately, there's so many different roadblocks that it's too difficult.
Give us an example of a barrier that that you hit a lot.
I can.
Yeah.
I take a dozen drugs every day for 25 years to live. Every year I have to get on a flight because I actually got a job and went into engineering because I needed to live. I can't live without these drugs, and they're routinely barred from me because it takes a dozen people, a nurse having a vacation, somebody forgetting something, a wrong fax machine. In 2020, a fax machine failure.
Right.
What the? Like, grow up, you guys. Like, it's just crazy, right? And I die, and it's legal to kill me because somebody doesn't do the right thing at the right time because someone's on vacation or someone's new or somebody filled out the wrong form or there's a different form or blah, 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 blah. It's on and on and on. And it's legal to kill patients, and we call it non-compliance. And the patient is trying. And I've had to get healthcare in other countries. That's where I've chosen to spend my money because I think it's important for me to live. Unfortunately, U.S. law thinks it's legal to kill me. I have an issue with it.
I think it also speaks to, as we're here talking about innovation and in a highly tech-driven part of the country and the world, there's a lot of people in the tech industry that have not traditionally been in healthcare who are now getting into healthcare, obviously. And what I see is that these people think like consumer products, but not necessarily understanding the nuances of the healthcare system. And so if they don't understand what a real patient actually goes through, they just think, oh, well, if I can just improve this one thing, then everything will be peachy. But that's not the reality for patients. And so I think as these big players start to get into healthcare more and more, they need to understand the nuances and the multiple stakeholders like we talk about that are impacting that.
One solution would be allow people to make it legal to stockpile drugs for a year if you've been on the same drug every day for a decade. Take a course. Be inspected, whatever, but allow the patient to get their medication, make it easier, and hold their feet to the fire for non-abuse, but it would actually be a lot cheaper than the way the money is spent now.
What I see happening in pharma is that it's been happening for a while, so it's not an incredible revelation, but that all the money is swung completely away from the diseases that kill most people and towards rare disease. And it's wonderful if we can cure rare diseases, and it's important to take care of people who have problems, unusual problems. But we can't, get new drugs in cardiology anymore. That's killing most of the population, or diabetes, because it's just not profitable in the same way. Right. And so we don't have a lot of impetus for innovation in the areas where the need is clear. It's very clear. And I think that we pretty much shut down innovation on the medical device side in the U.S. through a variety of means of reimbursement, and not only because of external forces. I mean, the tech industry has helped itself to that problem, but I think it's really interesting how our incentives sort of swing about. That's why.
And rare disease, Tanisha, in your new role, how do you define rare disease, and is it a focus for the industry?
I mean, undeniably, it's a focus of the industry. I also think that there's an open conversation now as to what constitutes rare disease. We just did an interview with Marshall Summers of the National Children's, and he really touched on this issue of the incentives that exist with the Orphan Drug Act. There are the right incentives, and some people believe they're almost too successful, but still there is roughly about 600 therapies for 7,000 rare diseases, and increasingly geneticists like Marshall are diagnosing more and more rare diseases. The last time I took a look at the portfolio for the industry, 65% of the portfolio was invested in oncology. And that's wonderful, and it's great, and it's incredibly important. But I don't necessarily think that we are making societal investment decisions, to Lisa's point, that fully align with what public health needs are, both from an individual level, seeking from rare disease, as well as a public health level. And part of that's a mix of what the science is, but a lot of that is a mix of who gives rewards in the system, what you're willing to continue to reward.
And I think we can learn a lot from what's happening in rare disease, designation aside, but we're getting into more precision medicine and things that are going to take larger, more common diseases and make them rare as we become more nuanced with how we can treat certain subtypes. So I think that we need to be looking at how rare diseases, accomplishing these sorts of things so that we can take cardiology or whatever it is and say, actually there is some rarity to certain aspects of this.
So the future belongs to those who want it. So if the U.S. doesn't want it, is somebody do better? I mean, your points all taken into account.
Someone you mean geographically, or someone?
Yeah, well,
as a kind of
if
industry,
the incentives in the U.S. are messed up, but is anybody have it right? Is there a...
We've all described the situation where the kind of unmet need is clearly described, actually from a patient perspective. Technical solutions are, sparse, right? So we've got a sparse set. But in the middle of this, there's a bunch of unmet need that is very clearly described by anybody that actually seems to be fertile ground for the companies that are, intermediaries in many other industries, like the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebooks. Do we think that they are in the middle of this kind of change in the game, or is it going to be the old players playing differently?
I think it's going to be the new players playing the same.
Okay.
That's the way I see it right now. I mean, because in some ways the same, in some ways different, right? I mean, the fact that Amazon can create a drug distribution company that's very different is different, clearly. And the use of voice, and all sorts of things that are going on in this technology is really interesting and potentially very cool. The incentives are the incentives. Because in healthcare, in the end, it's what gets paid for that matters. And from a company creation standpoint. So, not what matters to people. To companies. And I think, they're going to end up stuck in that same hole, and so I think about like pediatrics in general, and children's diseases. There's no money that goes into that. Venture capitalists do not fund them. There's no market, right? Except for when we were all kids once, which people seem to forget. But, it's really remarkable to me that the only way to get those kind of initiatives funded is through grants and not-for-profits, and not through the other methods of payment and funding that exists for other things.
I think what excites me about the big retail brands, whether it's the Googles or the Walmarts or the Amazons getting into healthcare, is that oftentimes we forget that healthcare is very diverse. And it's almost as if the centers of the biotech universe, which is true, are on these coasts. But these companies that play, like Walmart, are actually serving people who are in rural areas, and they see a very different perspective as it relates to health and what's standing in the way of people getting healthy. And for them, things like mental health and the chronic disease, comorbidities, is what is keeping their populations up at night. So I think that's a very exciting leverage into the system. It's very, by and large, has been very coastal focused.
I think that's probably the most innovative company in healthcare right now. Walmart.
Yes.
Walmart. Okay.
And I think, too, that's important. We want them to be thinking about that. what I like about these, larger tech companies, they are consumer focused, so they are going to push the envelope in that regard. We just want to make sure that they are talking to those people and not just thinking about them as your normal consumer. Again, it is more nuanced than that, but I do think that they're going to drive user experience and everything else that they've really gotten right before.
Yeah. So Mary Lee described an interesting personal situation. Has anyone ever spoken to you about that? Has anyone wanted to understand it?
Anyone? Sure. I've talked to lots of people about it. I wrote a New York Times op-ed about it 5 years ago.
But to you personally, has anyone ever asked you about your personal, how you overcome those barriers?
Yeah, it's unusual. Most people with my disease are on disability, right? So, and I found before starters and did all stuff. So, sure, people have asked me, but I think I just wanted to, and I can talk about my personal thing, but I'd rather talk. You were talking about VC not funding it, but 10x in this country, in the U.S., of the spending on healthcare and disease research is from non-VC backed. It's from the research investments from the not-for-profits. And so, is there a way to use that differently and creatively, more creatively than it is being used? Because if it's just about another paper, God help us. Let's use that effort in maybe a more different way. Yes, the papers are certainly important. It's how people get tenure, but ultimately we want the solutions, and we want to improve the solutions. And is there more? You've thought about this deeply. Is there a more clever way?
I'm sure there is. I am so taken aback when I visit people who do research for a living. I'm sure you have this experience in space, Tisha. And I say, okay, that's really cool, that science you've developed. How are you going to get that into the clinic? How are you going to get that into practice?
Right.
And they go, what?
It's not
They just think
It's not my problem,
Right.
I never thought about it.
Totally
There
uninterested.
is more of a focus on individuals and other organizations that's what they're trying to help with, is taking people from the bench side, those postdocs who came up with something, and how do they commercialize it into a, because there is a different skill set from A to B, and so what kind of partnerships can be formed, what does that look like, so that they don't fail, that they do have some platform for success.
So philanthropy is between 4 and 6% of the total research budget spent in the United States. But what's interesting about philanthropy is if you look at the innovation that's happened in rare disease in particular, it's the mom and pop who organized bake sales, who funded, hopefully in some cases, they had a high net worth family that was impacted. They were investing in natural history studies, tracking sort of the journey of that family, all the way to praying and hoping that a biopharma company got interested enough to work with them. So when I think of the kind of enablers that are needed in the system, it really does go towards this match between the patient communities, philanthropy, and government that can actually harness all of the end-to-end that's needed so that you don't have a metric of success just being publications or just being how much money you've raised or just being the pricing or all the things at the end of the cycle. So,
And I think one of the amazing things there that I personally feel strongly about, that we are seeing more public benefit corporations bringing that in sort of the biopharma space. Like, how can you pair that the ability to have profits, but also making sure that you're thinking most about what is that social impact as well. So I think that we'll see a balance between that going forward.
I saw today, I'm sure many of you saw this announcement of I don't remember the guy's name. Yeah, for Boston, starting a company to do lower cost drugs. Basically, be a fast follower of drugs, create them and with a deliberate plan to sell them at a lower price, which of course is what every industry on earth does, aside from healthcare, right? And yeah, exactly. I know all of it. The same thing would be cheaper. I'll sell more of them. Yeah. So brilliant, flash of innovation there. But it is in a way, because that's not how we do it. And yet, I saw that all of the backing came from very traditional venture capitalists. Right. And I thought to myself, those people are going to be very sad when the returns are lower. Yeah. Because that's what happens. And so I really wonder about that as a model. Like, how does that work? What alternative did he have? Really? Yeah.
Well, there's a definite problem with the idea that just ever rising prices is a natural good. Because I don't think there's any model in any other industry that said you just keep raising prices.
It's the opposite,
money.
Right?
Yeah. Usually it happens the other way around, but our industry somehow has escaped that for now. But it's been a very relatively recent problem.
I think Matt Harper's article pointed out a really important fact, which is unless you address the structural challenges in a model like this, it's going to be really difficult to see the payout. We've seen that already in the market of biosimilars, right? So, perfect example of this is a normal functioning market where generic entry should lower costs. But if you don't have a system that actually sees that as an advantage commercially, then it's going to be very difficult to create new models.
But are there different governments? I mean, literally, like China, like, is anybody doing it differently? Is it just status quo, every country, all of Europe, Australia, whatever? Or is anybody trying to mix it up outside of our legal construct and system? Nobody.
Not really, because the US is still paying the bulk of the development costs of every pharmaceutical.
And they do it a lot differently in lots of other countries, but without the US, those companies would not be as profitable.
Yeah.
So I think it's a question of, do you want to care about the stock market, or do you want to care about the healthcare system in this country?
And the perverse incentives within the US healthcare system are so dramatic that it's such an outlier in the world. But I want to come back to Jen. The idea of aggregating patients into an opinion or about what's needed. Tell us a little bit more about what the future is going to bring in terms of understanding patient need, in terms of being able to hear it, and in terms of being able to understand what it's about. What can we look forward to in terms of things changing in listening?
Well, I think, I can tell you kind of from stepping back and what we see in the industry, there's certainly a spectrum of how companies go about thinking about needing to talk to patients. And it really comes from like a risk aversion sort of spectrum. And so there are those more innovative companies that are thinking about how can we make sure that the patients, we're hearing them at all times, to the ones that we consider more innovation proof, that they're like, no, we're all good, we're going to shut that down. I do think that this is a business advantage. I understand there has to be a bottom line, but I truly believe that it is the companies that are listening to the people they're designing for that are going to, be most successful. So I think that it's going to go from like these sort of cutesy nice to have to this is how we're going to de-risk our innovation by partnering with these, individuals that will ultimately be the end users of our product. And so, what we are doing is making that more easy and accessible so that any company of any size, any scale, any innovator can be easily talking to people throughout the entire R&D and commercialization process. Because I have to say, I'm an academic by training and a patient, and I didn't quite understand marketing and business and all that beforehand. Now I got my big kid hat on. But I actually think it's a disservice if we don't do marketing in a way that makes people aware of the great innovations that are out there. So I do believe that there is an opportunity to do it in a way that is both from a regulatory standpoint, that it's above board, but also just a way that makes sure that the communities that are being designed with are then able to understand what's out there.
So is it still a dialogue? I mean, do we still have to ask, or is there, merely the company you're building is about listening, but not through dialogue, right? Looking, measuring, seeing differently.
Oh, the way we diagnose a lot of conditions, despite liquid biopsy and genetics and all of that. The way we diagnose many conditions is medical imaging, and the cost has only gone up in the U.S. and the margins are like 90% gross margins, and there's some infrastructure costs, but people aren't being diagnosed, or even in therapeutics. If you go in for radiation for a tumor, the tumor moves around in your abdomen, and so you're radiating statistically half of the area of healthy tissue. Because medical imaging is too expensive, it's actually pretty clear. So if you can lower the cost of medical imaging, you can make it up on volume. You literally can have these things in ambulances and so forth. It's not a hard sell for the PCs. Luckily, they're like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. Hospital room, or do we even need hospitals? A friend of mine runs the Detroit system. They've got 1,000 empty beds because people have inpatient surgeries, right? In a day surgery, they go home, they're recovering at home. The issue is the medical imaging and surgery. You can do those in a home or outside in an environment where you don't have to break the tissue. You don't need the hospitals. So let's blow up the hospitals. That's one thing. I mean, I'm hoping you guys can solve pharma. That's a whole other thing. But speeding up which things work should be helpful. But the perverse incentives of the U.S. is also because we always did it, there's that, and I think we discussed that, but, then you get the doctors, like, what about my job? You've never gotten a B in your entire life. You can stay up 3 nights in a row. We're not worried about them, but they're worried with the AI and machine learning. But see, this is inevitable. It's going to happen. Why don't we make it happen faster? Because we don't want more people to die. So how do we do it safely? But it seems obvious. And then I go, well, maybe the U.S. doesn't want to do it. We'll make laws against doing it. So which country do we go to do this? Because it's going to happen. It has to happen. We all are people, we want to live, we know sick people, we all have experience, and we're sick ourselves, like, it's going to happen. How do we make it happen as we sort of outline the issues, how do we just make it happen faster?
And I think to speak to kind of part of the question of how do we marry we want to talk to patients, but also there's all this technology that's collecting all this data on patients. I think is really important because, of course, we're seeing a lot of investment into things that are using AI or whatever else. I mean, the first point is that what does that data even include, and is it just more garbage, and is it inclusive? Because that's going to be one of the biggest issues, which we've seen published things about, discriminating against certain communities and not getting the same access to care. We don't have the same data, and so we need to make sure that we're learning from data sets that are going to make sure that we're taking care of patients. And I think one of the things from my lens that big data is great. It's, we need that, it's gonna help give signals, but it's just a signal, and that you need to then talk to that community to understand if you see sort of a blip on the map, what's wrong, and then how to fix it, because that data doesn't tell you that in particular. Right. So I do think that there's a wonderful marriage between the two.
It'll be interesting too, because I think if you really look at the data, it'll tell you that this drug that we give to everybody, whatever this lipitor picture, only works on certain people, doesn't work on us. So we'll find that out in the data, right? And that's a disincentive, right?
If you look for it,
yeah, so it's an interesting dichotomy, and notwithstanding the massive amounts of bias in the data, which do exist in mistakes in the data, all the rest cause problems. If you just decide it's accurate enough, at least for middle-aged white dudes, then you can. Slight offense. And you're going to find out that your drug isn't. The market for it is a lot smaller than you thought it was.
Right.
And so how do we incentivize people to do the right things? And I think we're not talking enough about that in the reimbursement world and all of the rest. I think there's been, and then the other thing we're finding now is we can actually cure some diseases. Who knew? Like hepatitis C, right? We can actually cure that now. Well, what's the incentive? Yeah, it's great. It's amazing, right? But most drugs aren't about cure. Most drugs are about, kind of keeping you alive while you're not cured. And so when we find cures, how do we incentivize that? Because it's not a repeatable business model if you're not sick anymore. So it's a very interesting set of problems that we don't really wrestle with well here.
So do we need a change in the financial model, right? Because the one we have is relatively recent. Is this a golden period for the pharmaceutical industry, or are we moving through it into a kind of new period where, we fund cures differently, we fund treatments differently?
Yes.
Tanisha, and merely you.
I think that, I do think that I want to actually reflect on Jen's question too, if that's okay, because there's a tie into it. I do think that the FDA has been such a catalyst for the industry and us all welcoming and being more open to the idea of what does patient-centeredness really look like. I don't think there's a single company that didn't have the idea that they're in business to improve people's lives, 100%. But what the FDA did was radically take that idea and its essence and boil it down to very specific things that we're looking for the industry to do. And I, for one, am incredibly excited about what we've seen in the last decade plus now for what the agency has been able to do and how the companies have responded. And so for us, even at Lexion, being in a rare disease space, like you cannot come to market or even think about the design of a clinical trial without deep engagement from the patient community. Because those patients are so sophisticated. They were collecting their natural history. They were involved in every therapy before you got on the block. Like for you to come in without that level of relationship building and engagement would just not be wise in the long run. And I would say that what we're looking at now is the FDA has just radically moved forward in this idea of patient-centeredness. And the blocks that we see now is when we come to market with patient-reported outcomes, we come talking about what patient-centeredness really means, what patients' unmet needs are, you have this wall of health technology assessment globally and payers who weren't on the journey with you. So now it's up to us to bring those end customers into that discussion about unmet needs and why we design trials the way we do, why we pick the endpoints and outcomes that we pick, and negotiate what it means to develop the evidence base that they're going to need to make decisions in the long run. Which I think that the pharmaceutical industry is in the infancy, and the device industry has had 2 decades of experience doing this even longer than the industry has.
Oh, I think if you think about like what happens 10 years, like if you look out 10 years ago, I think what's interesting about what's starting to happen now is this coalescence of different groups working together. So you see pharmaceutical companies getting into the services business, you see med tech companies getting into the tech business, and you see all these guys sort of coalescing into groups in ways they didn't used to. You have payers being providers and providers being payers. You got retail pharma developing medical devices. You got all sorts of crazy mix and match going on. And I think that's going to be the most impactful thing of the next 10 years, is that this confluence of thinking, types of models and things, has the potential for real change. Because if interests are aligned, the financial interests are aligned, especially you can do some of these things differently than we've struggled to do.
Well, what I think too, which of course, well, within the pharma space understand that people are coming together through different sorts of types of consortiums and whatnot to share best practices, because some of these things don't have to be proprietary. How you go about doing certain things is not going to change the molecule that you're developing. So how can we actually collectively come together to advance this rather than saying, oh, I'm not going to talk to you because you're a competitor. There's certain things that don't have to be competitive.
I definitely think this idea of what does the pre-competitive environment really look like. I mean, in my opinion, Lexion and the rare disease community can't not be focused on diagnosis and the diagnostic journey. If you ever meet a rare disease patient, they will tell you how years and years it took to get a diagnosis. And in a world where we are data rich, like how do we structure the data ecosystem moving forward to be faster and more accurate in identifying patients, and how do we do it knowing that most of these patients don't live in urban settings? They don't live next to the academic medical institutions. So that's why, for me, I agree with Lisa. Walmart is one of the most exciting companies, in my opinion, to get into healthcare, because they already have the bricks and mortar, or we have deserts of healthcare right now. And if we can harness the people who are in communities already and bring them into the healthcare space in a way that's going to be productive to meet end goals, I think that's exciting.
When I talk about a company that understands personalization, right, how to sell to the N of 1 or small groups or whatever, I mean, nobody knows about it, knows what guys do.
But how do we get that level of sophistication into the clinical trial space, for example? Because most people who go into clinical trials look the same. They're clean in terms of diseases. They have one disease and not most of the diseases people really have. They're mostly one race. They're mostly one gender. We have a lot of problems with even recruitment in the clinical study. So the middle of the country, for example, here is underrepresented in most clinical studies. So do we begin to address that with data or with some of the technology?
I think it's not the technology. I think you have to start with the communities that you're trying to reach. I mean, this is people in their ivory towers designing trials that only work for certain subsets of the population. And we've done some terrible things to certain communities in our sort of history. So we need to understand how to reach them in culturally sensitive ways. And we on the stage are not going to solve that. We actually need to then go to the leaders in those communities and bring them into the conversation, because otherwise we don't know what these needs are.
Well, the clinical trials have mostly been designed to pass the test, right? They're not designed to affect the outcome. And so I think that's where another place where the FDA can really help, be a catalyst for changing the models. And now we do have technology that allows virtual clinical trials and the ability to recruit, outside in normal places and engage with people and get them, what they need, drop ship it from Amazon, whatever. And so I think there's really no excuse for it except for history. I mean, most of the reason I think a lot of the trials aren't virtualized is because it's not the way we've always done it, and that makes people stop.
One of the things that excites me is when you see organizations who may have started by saying, I need, particular disease philanthropies or patient organizations, I need to know where to send my children if we're sick with cystic fibrosis. And they start off in the 1950s building referral service for where these families can send their children. And that becomes part of their centers of excellence for care delivery. And that becomes where they start their registries. And that becomes the clinical trials infrastructure. Like, this all begins the closer you can get to where people need the care and are getting care, and building the data ecosystems that don't draw a hard line between the delivery of care and clinical practice.
And I think, speaking to one of the questions that you had about the clean data, and I was having a conversation earlier with somebody about this, that yes, because of who is able to participate and who gets excluded from trials, we're only learning so much. So I actually was on a certain medication that in that time from when I started said medication and my yearly follow-up for a brain tumor that I had, my tumor was significantly increased and I had to have surgery to have it removed. I don't know the causality, and we never will know, but it's because those people with tumors get excluded in trials, and so therefore I'm not allowed to go back on these medications because they just don't know how it might behave. And so I think thinking about how can we use more real-world evidence, how can we have a more, mixed group that are actually participating in trials so we can learn the most, so we can actually impact the most people.
Sure, and actually, Tanisha, you made the point that the FDA has almost driven change into the pharma space. Do you think that's going to continue? Do you think the regulators are going to continue to be ahead of the industry in pulling instead of pushing? Or
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't say. I think the regulator has, the FDA has a very unique vantage point in that it has a very independent yet close relationship with the scientific community of the industry. And so they see the nuances of the science that's coming to market. And they are more and more aware of the hurdles that come once medicines are approved. So if you think about the device industry has been on a path of peer review, trying to have close relationships with payers for much, much longer than the drug side of the house has really paid attention to. But I think that you're increasingly going to see, both in the US and the EU, much tighter alignment between the regulator and the payers, the national payers, moving forward.
Just have
I can agree with that. I don't think the medical device, I disagree with Tanisha. Pants notwithstanding, I cannot agree. I think the medical device industry has been equally divorced from the process of engaging with patients, the process of engaging with the regulators, the process of engaging with payers early on. I mean, most of what happened over the last, not really the last 20 years of medical devices was slightly better, more expensive, didn't have a different outcome. And, occasionally something miraculous would come out of it, but mostly not. And, the FDA really clamped down on medical device companies, and maybe so hard that it became impossible to get anything approved, which was bad. They backed off of that. But it's really hard for medical devices to get approved for reimbursement now, notwithstanding regulatory. And that's a plus and a minus, right? On the one hand, good. We don't need, now 11-sentence stent or whatever it is, but we might need something that cures kidney disease differently, or something uncertain, right? And it's really not in their DNA either to spend a lot of time talking to all the other constituencies ahead of time. At all.
Well, that's what I see is interesting. So I sit on an FDA advisory committee as their consumer rep. And when we were having the conversation around biosimilars, it was also very challenging for people to understand how to even approve biosimilars because it is a different pathway than a traditional therapy coming to market. And so the conversation that this committee was having was around, well, we just don't know if it's worth it if we don't know if it's going to impact cost. But the FDA does not think that way because it's just about safety and efficacy, but yet patients don't exist in a vacuum. And so if it's going to be the same cost as a traditional biologic, but then you're driven there because the insurance company or this or that, it becomes challenging if we don't think about all those factors, yet at the same time, everybody has their own sort of stake in how they think about it. So it is very challenging because I don't think we have a good handle on how to reconcile that after it gets to market, then certain people lose ownership over that.
I mean, I don't want to say that the devices have it all figured out, but you at least have case examples in the device world where there's acknowledgement that post-market there needed to be more evidence collected on behalf of what payers needed. Right, so whether you look at TAPI, you can look at PET, had some bad example, TAVR's a better example. I think that's positive because those are early foundations for the agreement that the regulators and payers have to have on what is a reasonable level of expectation of the evidence when something comes to market and where we need to see it down the road. And that's a very healthy conversation for us to have.
Yeah. And Vinay Prasad's book on oncology, essentially pointing out the problems the FDA is having. It's been approving a bunch of stuff in oncology, but then hasn't been following up to see whether the real-world evidence is coming back to it, to see whether the accelerated approvals that it's been giving out have been worth it, whether they've led to things that are surrogates leading to the things that you'd expect them to lead to. The FDA just isn't following up. The companies aren't doing it, so there's a disincentive in the system to play ball, right? So the regulator's doing some things, but not everything. So.
And I think what's heartbreaking is when you have the regulator and the patient community and the medical community that are so excited about a new innovation, and you don't have the payers on board, and you have this enormous gap between something that could have helped somebody where time is ticking for them, and there's lack of momentum to get access. And that's, I think, what we are all sort of focused on post-genetic cell and gene therapy, where you have radically different transformative therapy coming to market, and you have a fragmentation of how payers are going to be dealing with it moving forward.
And one of the things that patients really struggle with too are things around like step therapy and having to fail certain things first when we know that it's not going to work, or they had something that worked and they just happen to change employers and now have different insurance and have to start all over again. And so all of these things impact, again, the patient's ability to actually get the care that they and their physician have prescribed and made a plan for, but the payers are coming in and saying, we have a different plan for you.
Well, most of the time now, medical device companies, they want to sell something and get paid or reimbursement. They have to prove the cost efficiency of it. They have to prove it, and we don't really put that burden on the drug companies. And maybe we should, I'm sorry, I'm getting shot on the way out, but,
exit out the back.
If it's true that by doing a certain, tagging, you reduce the number of hospitalizations, reduce overall costs in a 1 to 2 year period, which is what the payers are looking at, right? Because you're only in an insurance plan by and large for 2 years max. Unless you're in Medicare, that might be a little longer. But, maybe the drug companies need to do the same thing. What's the cost-benefit analysis of that $300,000 drug? It may be significant, but it depends on the outcome.
And it's not mandated as a demonstration. So in terms of reimbursement, precision medicine, do we think this decade we move towards precision medicine? Because we've kind of used the words without meaning it so far. Are we going to get any more closer to real precision medicine in the 20s? Jen, you laughed most there.
Most. I would still, I'm an optimist in many ways. I do want to keep driving it there. But I think even coming around with things like patient-centeredness, a lot of us use these buzzwords and the companies out there, but without taking the steps to actually do it. So I think time will tell. And again, I think it's those companies who are the true innovators that are taking the actual next step. And from an innovation standpoint, I don't mind failure. I think that is going to be part of it. And I think that there are companies or anybody in the space that if they're just too afraid to take that next step and to deliver on it, then we're not going to get anywhere. So I would just like to see people at least try.
Yeah. And Mary Lou, you're in that. Essentially, you could be in a company that helps to redefine diseases or recategorize or.
Yeah, but as I think precision, I think it's a cost structure thing. I'm really struck by the Walmart Amazon discussion. If the existing system can't deal with it, it's too much data, too complicated. Like those companies maybe are. From what I'm hearing from you, is our best bet. So I think it's sort of interesting. Who are they investing in?
Like CVS has brought its own dialysis device to the FDA that they developed. Like that's crazy, right? But it's not because they are involved in this business. They have employees affected by this. They're thinking about it in a very holistic way. But if they can now, CVS of course part of Aetna, so now they're the payer and the retail pharma and the PBM, and if they can control the service side too, now it's a closed system. You can save a lot of money.
And do precision because if they get the data, they can then give custom. Therapy is great, but $1 million a shot is so hard to support. Costing it and get it to people, right? Like Is that what you mean? I mean, what's specific, that's sort of one end of precision health.
Well, there's two things. I mean, we've got 100-year-old disease classifications in some cases, right, where, especially in CNS or neuroscience, they're not fit for purpose for designing clinical studies against, say, a schizophrenia population, poorly diagnosed, late diagnosed, imperfect, imprecise medicines, and then we measure the same things. So I guess the question is, do we move towards more precise disease classifications?
Down from brain disease, I mean, it's a subjective measurement of disease. If you answer these questions for depression, and you gain a lot of weight, you're sleeping all the time, you have thoughts of suicide. The answer is yes to that, and litany of other questions that we class. But last summer, 5 hospitals pulled their 1,200 fMRI scans of people with clinical depression, and they showed patterns, precision, if you will, $20,000 a shot per scan, but just showed that there were patterns of anhedonia, depression, or different types of depression, which gave an objective measurement of depression, where you could see if a drug was making it better or worse in an objective way. And yeah, I mean, that's enabled by lower cost scanning in that case. But there's a lot of different aspects of precision medication where tools that were cheaper with the data that got the relevant details across different populations with different, different attributes, which I think we've both spoke eloquently about, could enable that. Who's going to do it and what? Brain disease seems like literally a no-brainer, but then you've got, psychologists. Wow, they could have a billable test, like a real lab test. Wow, that could be super cool. But changing that, oh my gosh, that's not where we're going to start. Like, literally, brain-computer interface is easier to start with. Or like put it on a dog. Do people want to talk to the dog? Probably.
Yes.
That might make the money to enable us to get that stuff done.
I want to talk
crazy.
about
I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like, and so how do we navigate through this? Work with Walmart? I mean, that's sort of interesting. Because who actually will care? I think it's an interesting discussion. I'm new to this. I come from consumer electronics. We just make it up on volume, ship a lot of stuff that's general purpose that people can use, like your smartphones, like your laptops. You can make things in that cost structure that can be useful as sort of Swiss Army knives that can be useful for all people. And we're trying to sort of help in that direction. But inside of the system, there are these challenges that I think have been well articulated by all people.
to make sure.
I mean, to
I want to work with all of you.
Q&A? We can do some Q&A from the crowd?
Give me 10
I think we
minutes.
just did.
Give me 10 minutes. And, yeah.
I just want to say.
Can I say no now?
I'm not sure.
I think that one of the questions, part of your question is are we going to start seeing more of a ability to do personalized health delivery? And I would actually toss that question back to Lisa. We're just seeing a emergence of whether it's Devoted or an Oscar or these health plans that are at their base supposedly different as it relates to digital and how they're approaching information. Are we seeing them take share? Are we seeing their ability to actually scale?
It's funny because what I was thinking about was how services is becoming more precise, and I wish we didn't talk about precision medicine as a pharmaceutical thing, because I think it's a health delivery thing, right? So we're seeing those insurance plans, they're taking some share, but they're really
The little one.
But there's also a huge rise in specialty clinics. So clinics for young women, clinics for menopause, clinics for guys with, this prostate problems, clinics for this, clinics for that. Very specialized, right? Pediatric clinics. And that's really precision medicine in a way, assuming that what they do there is different, which we shall see, right? We shall see. But I think it is interesting to step back and think about precision healthcare instead of precision medicine, and think about, that most of the cost of medicine is actually in services, not in pharmaceuticals. And how do we use that as a channel to give people the right thing the right way? Right? And I think it's really early. None of these companies on much scale, but they'll get there.
I'm minded to go to the audience right now.
What was your first clue?
There's a clue from the audience. I'm presuming there's a question.
You're just going to yell out
To
there.
begin. Yeah. Do you want
I can't see that
to
stuff.
yell out a question?
Sure. I had a question for Jen brought up the topic of patience and data. Are you ready?
Yeah, I can
We
begin.
can hear you.
Can we bring up the lights?
So Jen brought up the topic of patience and data, and I was particularly interested in hearing from the group on how you're thinking about the data from patients and of patients in the work that you do.
That's a question for you.
Well, I think it's a question for everybody. I can talk a lot about patient data. I think a couple things to maybe bring to the forefront and think about is, especially as we're getting more into the tech side and different acquisitions and where does that data go, is as we are using this data that is so important, what is the level of consent that a patient has on having that used? And is that going to look differently if a patient would be okay with it being used for a research aspect versus with a pharma company or whomever? But I think that that's what we're going to see going forward is how can we give patients more choices over where their data is shared. We do know that data can be re-identified, and so we need to be really thoughtful about that. And what are those consent processes? I mean, we've seen some M&As already, and what happens to that. Even when a patient is signing up to a 23andMe, and then a GSK is buying that data, that's not what the person really had in mind. So I think we just need to be thoughtful about that. And I can't speak about patient data if I don't also talk about the ownership aspect, and that I do believe that not only should they have a say in what's happening to their data, but can they share in that upside? Is there a financial benefit for them sharing that data, especially in a commercialization process?
Anyone else want to weigh in? So I guess two requests. One is, could we maybe get the lights on the audience a little bit so we can see them? And it's getting noisy at the back. So if anyone's talking instead of listening to the panel. Any other questions from the room?
I've got a question.
Sure.
So, I love it every time I come to JPM. It's so therapeutic and heavy, but I was getting really excited with a few of you mentioning devices and even more so imaging. Because if we think about diagnostics and monitoring, it really comes down to imaging. And I love it how you said that your father could not sell an MRI, to save his life, but now we're looking at a $50 billion industry, right? Unfortunately, imaging really hasn't changed. The physics hasn't changed in the last 30 years. We're dealing with the same sort of set of physics to a certain extent. But now we're moving into personalized diagnostics, personalized monitoring. We talk really a heavy game on the therapeutic end. I want to know what you guys think about on the device end and the diagnostics and monitoring end, really being able to really understand diagnostics on a personalized level. Never gets brought up.
Meredith, I think you should go for
Right, I think if we could image our body for the cost of a phone call, which is what we're working on, and there's a group of people. The physics, true, hasn't changed. The manufacturing processes and the trillion-dollar manufacturing supply chain has massively changed. And so there's a dozen different startups working on portable medical imaging. Butterfly, you've probably heard of. It's a ultrasound kind of, their first out, resolution, I don't want to do, what they're doing next is probably even better, but there's a bunch of things happening to leapfrog what we've had in medical imaging, like the computers of the 1940s and 50s took up the size of the room, right? We're about to do that in medical imaging, that we can read and write. With a lot of different efforts. A lot of it is in portable ultrasound in new different modalities. We're doing something with camera chips that are literally in iPhones, in the infrared, because your body's translucent to infrared. So while the physics isn't changing, the manufacturing processes that were primarily developed for most recently for next generation augmented reality and virtual reality are coming to play. in a way to read and write our bodies and brains. And so there's a huge effort, but yeah, you're right, it's not a JPM Morgan, it's all pharma, you know. Okay, cool. But it'd be nice to see it. Even at RSNA, I went to RSNA, the 105th this year radiology conference. It was all MRI, CT, and PET. It's so surprising where this stuff is happening in startups. So it'll come. The first things are shipping. But what that can enable us to do, if you can scan your body every day with no radiation, you start to understand another aspect of disease progression. Everybody talks about Moore's law for sequencing genes. Great. Well, consumer electronics has been using Moore's law for a long time, and there's these discontinuities in Moore's law and that enable the physics. For example, every single one of you in this room have cameras in your cell phone with pixel sizes that are the size of the wavelength of light. That means from a physics perspective, you can record the waves in the wavelength of light, not just the intensity of the light. That allows you to see inside of your body in high resolution because of the information that you can get and some math, Fourier transform. Sorry, that's all the technology, that's all the physics we talk. But it's happening now, and there's this whole group and effort, and they're not at JP Morgan because I don't even understand JP Morgan. Like, we all come to this conference, but nobody actually gets to go to JP Morgan, so there's all these other conferences. Like, I'm here, I'm in San Francisco, but I don't really get it. I have no idea what JP Morgan actually is, because nobody gets to go, but we all come and we go to these other things. There's an opportunity there too, I suggest.
Let me also try to tie together something. So, you know, Tanisha, you also pointed out this patient-centeredness, and the FDA says we need to do this. I don't quite give some clear guidance on it, but also talking about patient-reported outcomes. I give a lot of pushback to patient-reported outcomes and all the PROs that are out there, because just because a patient reports something does not mean that it's meaningful. So if we think about patient-centered outcomes and what matters to patients, my sort of lens being that I have arthritis, so I've done a lot of work in rheumatology, and what we found is that patients care about imaging. Patients want to know if their joints have destruction, and they want to know what that looks like. So we need to pair together the other outcomes that they care about, fatigue and pain, but also what do their images look like, and is that also showing something? So I do think if we do care about what does the patient want, it ties in all the different aspects.
Right. But I'm cautioned, I guess, that, and I think my dad would probably say now, that he regrets some of the products that we created and launched. Not because they're not good and valuable, they are, but that it's created so much false positive and so much cost to the system that is unwarranted. And even still with the sophisticated physics and the sophisticated products, big, small, or whatever, you can do an image of the back and still have no idea why somebody has back pain. Because the functional image and the physiological image have almost a relationship to each other in many cases. So I think, you know, one of the things I'm hopeful about in diagnostics is that somebody who's going to figure out this AI stuff and actually use it to find precision in diagnostics. Yeah. I'm not sure if, I don't know about your product, I don't know if it's good or bad or different, but I mean, I'm not sure if being able to image your body every day is a good thing. You're going to find stuff that's going to resolve itself. You know, so I think we have to be very careful about, you know, how we think about diagnostics. Right now, clearly, we don't pay for diagnostics that don't have some sort of intervention associated with it, drug, device, or whatever, because we don't. You know, whether that's right or wrong is a good question, ethically and in so many other ways, but a lot of people struggle with whether they want to know they're going to get Alzheimer's in 10 or 15 or 20 years. When you know what the answer to doing, what you should do now, you should eat right, exercise, and sleep well. Thank you. You know, $100. But you know, it's really a challenge. And I think other forms of diagnostics, like genetic testing, being more precise and useful, and maybe some of the liquid biopsy stuff will someday work for somebody. I don't know. And you know, getting these things going, I think that's interesting. Is figuring out other methods of diagnosis that are ancillary to the imaging as well, so we can, you know,
carry that thing. Why bother going to a doctor? Why do anything? Like, if we just don't want to know. Because if you can scan your body, and yes, we all have cancer all the time and resolve it, but wouldn't it be interesting to learn about it? To learn what doesn't get
God, I'm so anxious already.
Or what, you know, what those drinks did to your liver at the bar tonight. You know, like, wouldn't it be interesting to see? But more importantly, in my life, I was a PhD student in physics at an Ivy League school in 1995, living in a wheelchair, couldn't move half my face, body full of sores. I couldn't even subtract, and so I dropped out to go home to die because no one could figure out what I had. I was at Brown, they had a med school. So finally, I'd gone home, and one of the professors called me and said, "You have massive headaches too, massive headaches." They gave me an MRI. They found my brain tumor. I got to live. And so this whole let's not let people have medical imaging, I think it's bullshit. It's just, it's too expensive, and rich people get to have it. And I go to TED every year, and a lot of billionaires do, and they're even cost conscious. For $3,000, full body MRI scan in Canada, not here. Oh, everybody can have this technology. Why do we allow blood tests? We just assume it's $10,000. What if it's $1? What's the problem? We get more data, we understand that as a piece of the information, or we could just say, no, we don't want to know what's going on inside of our bodies. Why would we not want to know? You can do structural and metabolic. It's in reach for cheap. Luckily, the VC community sort of gets it and boy, that's good. That's how we actually diagnose things. But we could decide, why go to the doctor? Why let's just hope for the best and not know and bury head in sand. It's the other alternative. And by the way, I know you don't believe that, but I'm playing devil's advocate. I have great respect for you. But what's the problem? If there's no radiation, 6% of cancers in the U.S. today, according to one study, are caused by the medical imaging systems.
I think there's an interesting paradigm, right, which is medicine is still largely empirical. We think that we've diagnosed it, and then we treat it, and we find out if we actually diagnose it properly or if the drug works, and it's a bit of a mix of both. So the potential to use diagnostics and prognostics differently as part of the precision medicine approach is clearly coming. So did you say there's another question?
Yeah, there's a guy.
The guy right here.
Which I felt a lot more secure about than the lights game.
Yeah, you're in the middle of it.
One of the things that I am most appreciating about this panel is that most of you are not men. Which is incredible.
Yeah, most of us.
You said something twice that I've been reflecting on. I think you said, if not the U.S. who, and should we, you said something a little provocative around should we even have hospitals in the future. There's part of me that loves that idea. Let's graduate past some of the models. I'm also aware that there's a lot of people who aren't in this room right now who rely on some of our safety nets and some of our systems of care. I am so on board with this model of innovation, and Jane, you know that I cherish the idea of the patient-driven world. I'm also very worried we're going to leave some people behind.
That's right.
I'm curious, how do we bridge this gap between the future we're talking about tonight and the reality that some people live today, which is not care at all?
The biggest problem for most people is they don't have insurance. That's the problem. A key problem that has to be solved. You can't be 10 million, 30 million, whatever number of people uninsured if you live in a world of insurance, right? And every country around the world that has universal insurance has better outcomes than we do.
Not quite. Just the UK doesn't, right? So we've got universal coverage. A lot of our outcomes in cancer are worse and so forth. So
On average, though, I think
because of the rationing.
yeah, there's probably some. All right,
so you got attention.
we can argue with pieces, but I think in general, having insurance is key to getting
absolutely.
something.
Certainly for most people.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, I completely agree that there's so many people that are always left out of these conversations. If you look around the room, most people end up looking like we all see each other at the same conferences. So first of all, acknowledging that the people that we're probably trying to reach are not here with us. And so that's challenge number one. I think from a standpoint of developing out new technologies and all of this, I have no problem with making that available and accessible. And I think it comes to the point, though, about different people will choose to engage in different ways. But that you have a menu of options that the individual can decide, do I want to scan my body and have all that information? I believe that patients should have access to their data. And then just like, I talked about my financial data. I don't know what it all means, but I have access to it, and then I can go to an accountant or broker who can help me translate it. So I think the more we can make this stuff accessible, and then the individual, we can help curate that for them so that they can have the most personalized experience so that they can get the care that they need.
We have to do a much better job of educating clinicians too. To say, the time it takes for best practices to spread, and the thinking about health in a more holistic way. You know, here we are in San Francisco. There's going to be a lot of talk about homelessness this week because there often is now. JPM as there well should be. And you know, if you gave people homes, they wouldn't be as sick. So you know, what's the treatment? It's finding homes. You know, and I think we're starting to see people think about that in healthcare, but we haven't combined the financial streams yet. So it's a really interesting problem.
Tanisha?
Yeah. No, I agree with everything that's being said. I think about sometimes you get to these conferences, and the technology will be available. We'll be able to do scans at home, but I oftentimes wonder whether or not we're catering to a world that's just going to pay cash, and the rest of the system is not ready for that. And we haven't even educated people on the simple lab tests that they get and what they need. So what are we going to do to create a much more knowledgeable, from a public health perspective, community about their own health? I think that's critical. I mean, even this week, thank God for One Medical, it keeps all my lab tests. But I got my lab results back, and I could read them, but I still wanted to talk to at least the PA to say, well, what is this? What does it mean? I consider myself relatively sophisticated. So it's not just about whether the technology is going to be available. It's how do we actually create a community of people that can take that and actually create insights and take action differently.
Yeah. And actually some of that upgrade has to come in the physicians as well, right? Because they may not know what to do with those data that you just developed, because, you know, you've got a curve of physicians, right? You've got the ones that would know, the ones that have no idea, and then there's the ones in the middle that would guess.
I used to work for a doctor who said, by definition, 51%, 49% of all doctors are worse than average.
Right.
You know,
It's impossible for any clinician to keep up on that technology.
Well, yeah.
So you actually have to use the tools of our time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, give in. You have to use AI and machine learning. It's inevitable. Yes, it can be misused, but you can't. Otherwise, you get, oh, well, like when I went to medical school, is what you get. And you get ignored the next 30 years or however many years. And even still, it's intractable for anybody to be able to read all papers.
Yeah.
So that.
Yeah. Okay. One more question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your point. You guys had mentioned Enterix before, which is Alexis Morris's new company. So if you could pick, say, one perturbation of the system that you think would actually spur something meaningful, whether it's more engagement, whether it's better outcomes, whether it's making people drop their prices, what would it be? Because there's a lot of ways to look at things systemically, saying if we all did this better, it would be great. But usually things happen with like one catalyst. So if you could pick kind of one catalyst, like what would you change that you think would make other people follow it?
Who wants to go first? One thing.
I would focus on redefining primary care.
Primary care in what way?
In terms of their adoption of AI, their ability to connect more seamlessly with specialty care. I think that at the heart of it is the primary care providers, your clinics that are at the heart of what needs to be reimagined.
I think I would, it's hard to narrow it down to one thing.
Only get one, sorry.
Only get one?
Only one.
I would start teaching people from young childhood about eating healthy and taking care of themselves.
You guys want to go next? One thing.
I mean, I think the biggest thing that can have the greatest impact is changing the innovation process and making it more consumer driven so that we are understanding. You say you don't know if it's going to be this, this, or this. Well, neither do those companies. So I think that that's like one of the biggest things that we can do is make sure that those companies have a system set up so that they can understand what those changes are.
I think it's something related to education, about the patient not doing doctors knows best and the patient running their own health care and learning about their symptoms and making that, putting that into curriculum. I think so many people think it's somebody else's job. If they internalize it as their job, as the patients in their groups do, I think we could have huge problems.
See, my goal would be, I think if the US behaved like the UK and rationed healthcare, instantly everyone would behave differently. So I think that the biggest issue that we have in the US is essentially just this open-ended checkbook for anyone launching anything new gets reimbursed, gets accessed, and so someone has to pay. If you had to choose who gets what, and it all came from a limited budget, people would behave very differently. I think you'd move faster towards payment for performance, you'd get more value-based healthcare, you get more cost-effectiveness evaluation. And you could do that because the US is funding everyone else's R&D. All the drugs are developed with a view to the US market because it's an open-ended checkbook. So instantly dropping the available dollars here would make a difference tomorrow. So, any other questions from the audience? So I've got one more question as a kind of summary from the panel, which is, how do we make pharmaceuticals cheaper? In the next decade, are we expecting them to get more expensive in the next decade or less?
I think they're going to get less expensive.
Less expensive because
I think the payers are going to stop anything.
Okay. And what's the mechanism?
You want to reimburse for it, sorry. If you want to pay for it, you go right ahead.
Okay.
And so I think it's going to drive people to come up with lower cost alternatives or reduce costs.
I think we'll get less expensive because I think you're going to have competition in areas that we used to think where you'd never get competition. Even how many therapies for SMA are we going to have in the next 2 years? I mean, that's pretty amazing.
So you think competition will change the pricing?
I think competition has effectively changed pricing in major clinical categories like cardiovascular disease and mental health, which is part of the reason why you may not be getting the innovation because the costs have been driven so low.
I think that costs will go down, I'm hoping, please. And I think that if we can use the tools and the multiple stakeholder approach to the innovation process, we can shorten the timeline. Therefore, there is not the same reason why drugs have to be as expensive if we can get them to market faster so we can start making money.
You didn't answer the question. Do you think they will get less expensive?
No, I do think they will, because I think that is going to be the pressure that the market has.
Right.
So I do believe that will happen. I hope.
It sounds awful, but I think you make it up in volume because we all want to be better. And so they're just, everybody will want to take them if they're better. And so we already have a huge portion of the U.S. taking 5 medications a day that might go to all humanity, which is, I'm not pleased to deliver that, but it feels inevitable.
Awesome. I think just from the noise from the bar, I think it's time to it's time to close this panel. And can I get everyone to say thank you to this panel? Just to say a reminder of what's next, we've got Yoni from Y. I'm going to talk to him about the overlap of mental health, music, and health insurance for a little while. And then the music will begin around about half an hour's time. So do get drinks. We'll come say hi, ask some of the questions that we didn't ask there. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.